I'm Mridu Parikh, and I'm about to have a productive conversation with Mike Vardy.
Welcome to A Productive Conversation. I'm Mike Vardy, and we're back with another Flashback Friday episode, this time with Mridu Parikh, who is joining me for the third time on this podcast. But this time, we're just getting an update from her before we dive into our original conversation from 2017, where we talk about alignment and automation. And it's really fascinating to listen to our update interview, the conversation that we had just a mere few days ago. And then what we talked about nearly 8 years ago. She runs Life is Organized. We've had obviously several conversations over the years. We haven't touched base in quite some time, and you'll hear that through the update interview. But just wanted to bring this out of the vault for this Flashback Friday, considering the time of year that we're releasing it. We're coming to the end of the month of January here in 2025. If you're listening to this later, this can still work for you, but the idea of just getting yourself set up and putting things in place to help you make the most of your relationship with time and truly be productive. This episode will help you with that. So without further ado, let's get to my conversation with Mridu Parikh. First off, one we just had a few days ago, and then we'll get into our original episode from 2017. Don't forget to check out the show notes too, because there is a mention of the other time that we spoke, and you can check out that episode through the show notes as well. So let's get started. Mridu, thanks so much for coming back to be part of a Flashback Friday episode. And we're flashing back. This would be 2 episodes we could have flashed back to, because 2017 and 2020, we've linked to both in the show notes. But it's great to catch up and just see, like, it's been 5 years. Well, almost 5 years. I guess we just started 2025. But how's life? What's been going on? You made it through the pandemic, because before, when we last spoke, I think COVID-19 was like just in the beginning. I think it was April, I think. So it was just in the beginning of it. What's gone on in the past few years? Has there been anything monumental that you're like, this radically changed? Or has it been sustaining mostly?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me back. It is so fun to catch up. And even, I know everyone else can't see us, but just to see your face and hear your voice. And we were just catching up personally about how our kids have grown. And you know how you forget that other people's kids grow up? Like,
Yeah.
You think your kids grow up and you forget. And so when you just said your daughter is at university, I'm like, oh my gosh. So both my kids are now in university and college. And so I'm an empty nester. So that's got to be the biggest change ever right now in our lifestyle. The time freedom, I think the mental load that's just off. I think for me, I didn't even recognize how much mental capacity was put into the kids and thinking about the kids all the time, whether it was homework or dinner or activities or friends or drugs or God knows what, right? It was like always, and then college applications. And it is amazing when they're out of sight, out of mind. It just kind of goes like all that fretting and thinking. And anyway, so that has been probably the biggest change for me.
It's interesting because when I think of my daughter in Montreal right now, first off, it's not like how I didn't go to post-secondary, but when we would go away and our parents, you'd have to have a phone call or a letter.
Mm-hmm.
I snap my daughter at least once a day and she snaps back, right?
Yeah.
Like, so as long as you're meeting them where they're at, but you are right. The bandwidth is much lower, but it's such a different vibe in so many ways, including, like, I remember my mother would say, I'll never stop worrying about you.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, well, I don't worry about my kids. I think, we all know that worry it can be a big time suck, but
yeah,
they're never at top of, like, when they're not at top of mind, like you're talking about, but they're there. And you have to kind of trust that what you've done up to that point will allow them to, you're kind of there as a support system more than the guide. And there's this book that I will link to in the show notes. I was done the show notes because we have the update episode that's coming up after this, but there is a book called A Lighthouse Parenting, I think it is, or talks about lighthouse parenting.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like the the antidote to helicopter parenting. So it's instead of you swooping in and being there, it's you're a lighthouse and there's a signal and they know that they can trust it and you're there and they can come to you and and I'm like that. I actually texted my wife when I first saw that article. I think it was on CBC Canada. I'll link to that. That's probably the easiest thing to link to. And I said, I think we were ahead of the curve. I think we were doing this already because I didn't feel like a helicopter, but I thought we were like, hey, if you need us, we're here. And I think that role like stays that way until your light goes out.
Yeah, it's very true. It's very true. I feel very much the same way. I'm not worrying all the time now. It's just, but they're there. That's always a there. But I do have a lot more time and a lot more time to reconnect with my husband and rediscover, what we enjoyed about each other, and everything's not revolved around the kids, and explore some new things with work. And so, yeah, it's a fun stage of life.
Now, since we last spoke, I mean, the book, which we linked to in the show notes, Accomplish It, that's been out there for a while now. And one of the things I actually alluded to before we hit record was the changes in the work that we do. Have you noticed attitudes or behaviors around managing one's time or one's relationship with time and productivity that may not have been as prevalent before, either because conditions have changed externally, like again, post-pandemic, et cetera, or conditions internally because you now have this extra bandwidth that you've got maybe a bit more available to you to kind of look at things from different lenses or dig deeper into things that you may not have been able to before?
I think partially it's a phase of life and just getting older, honestly, getting more mature.
Mm-hmm.
As we get closer to the second half, or not probably their second right now, I'm in my second half of my life, thinking more about what's my legacy going to be? What are those? I think I've been very much in tune with what are my goals, what are my priorities, but really how am I role modeling? What am I going to leave on this earth? How am I going to make an impact? What are those bigger questions, which we're always thinking about? But again, I think with the kids around and always you're just trying to like get them to where, you hope that they're going to be the type of people that there is a little bit of neglect or just not enough time to be thinking about this for yourself. So I think for me it's those bigger questions of wisdom and experience and thinking through sort of like, okay, in the second chapter of my life, how do I really want to show up? What's really important to me? How do I want my family and legacy for that to look like? Yeah.
Do you find that the bigger questions are leading to the desire to accomplish less because you're not thinking that you have to do all the things? Because I think that's something that I've come across, not just personally or through the work that I'm doing on myself, but also when I'm interacting with clients. I'm like, do you really need to do that thing? Like, let's think long term. I think I've found that I think that perspective and that wisdom, like you said, that comes with experience and just the expertise we have. It's people think I have these bigger questions, which means more. I'm like, actually, I think the bigger questions are there's less. You actually get to winnow things out a bit more.
I 100% agree. I like to think I'm somewhat of a minimalist, but over time I've become more and more so that way, and simplifying more and more. And whether that's relationships, like what relationships are most enduring and mean the most for me? Where do I really want to spend that time? What does connection really look like? What is the work that's most meaningful? What are the results that are most powerful for me? So yeah, it's just really simplifying it and getting it down to the core and kind of just taking out all the complications as much as possible, but in a way that feels really rewarding and really satisfying. It is a beautiful place to be, and I feel it refining more and more and more as I get older. Yeah.
Do you think that the world as we are in now needs more of that and is more open to that? Or do you think that there is still a big pushback towards, let's say, quantity over quality. I can tell you, I feel like there is a bit more of a balance emerging. And remember, I mean, you and I both know balance isn't 50-50.
Yeah.
But I also feel that there is this fear around that balance because quantity is such a surface level thing that can be measured in ticks and numbers and points.
Yeah.
Whereas quality is a lot, it's harder to wrap your head around. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I think the forces are against us. So it gets harder and harder to find the quality because the more that there's like the likes and the Instagram and the snaps and the consumerism and everything is one click now, right? Amazon is one click and it goes right to your door, and the instant gratification. It's like there's more and more and more of that. So the forces are working against us because we're just getting more inundated, and that barrage of information and instant gratification. And so it's harder to sift through, I think, to find the simplicity.
Right.
So yes, I think there is a balance emerging, but it's also like you have to get very intentional about it and pretty deliberate, because it's so easy to get sucked into that because it's hard. Especially I think being a younger person these days, when you don't have maybe the experience or wisdom that we are at this point of our lives, it is really challenging, to weave, like sift through all of that noise and not get sucked into it.
It's exhaustive and exhausting.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is
100%.
because I can tell you that as of this recording, I am increasing my social media output, which most people are going the other way. But what I'm doing is being very intentional about it and, scheduling like the stuff I probably should have done before. Again, as we talked earlier, my job initially was I am running a business and I run it from home and the kids are here instead of, and I mean, I'm being very obviously reductive here, but instead, once my daughter was come, like, oh no, I'm a parent and my business is the thing I do because I'm at home, not the other way around. But now that there is that more bandwidth, the room, the space, I think that's it too. It's not just the time, it's the space. I'm able to dedicate more to that in an intentional way. And here's the interesting thing, for the first time by doing it that way, not following, I mean, I'm obviously taking heed with some of the advice and experience from others who have it, but I'm also doing it with an infusion of who I am across the board. I'm seeing results that I didn't anticipate, both that are, I think, helpful to others, but also helpful to me to say like, oh, so even though there's a lot of noise, my signal is getting through to the right people. And that's back to the legacy idea. The impact that I want to have on people as we navigate through these very turbulent waters, because we are in this unknown of, I mean, is there going to be remote work? Is there not? Why are we getting rid of it? Shouldn't there be a balance? No, there shouldn't be. Yes, there should. Well, if people are working, how do we know? Like all of that stuff, again, it's very exhaustive, which then can become exhausting. So which tactics have you changed in response to maybe what you've noticed in the 5 years since, well, first off, since your book came out, but also just as time has passed? What are some of the things that you're doing a bit differently that you may either not have thought to do differently before, or you wanted to, but you just didn't have the space?
Yeah. Well, what do you want to react to? One of the things that you said, that's funny, that I also was spending more time on social now, which is counterintuitive. It's like but I do have, just like you, that the more of that mental bandwidth, more of the space, more of the time to be very deliberate about that. So we're very, very similar in that. And I'd say the changes I made, again, I think a lot of it has to do with relationships. I'm thinking it come back down to that, whether it's, and it could be in a business way, whether it's networking, building those connections, or personally, who I want to spend that time with, and being very intentional about making a phone call 3 times a week to different people to make sure I catch up with them, make sure, people in different countries are my cousins that I want to, it's really being intentional about that. I think that that extra room and that space has given me time to think through that, what those relationships are. I know at the end of your life, people always say, the thing I wish I focused on more was, or the thing that made me the happiest was my relationship. It's never the money or the clothes or anything else, consumerism. It's really like those relationships. And I think that for me has probably been the biggest shift, given that extra bandwidth and time now.
Mridu, this has been great to catch up. I want to make sure that our listeners stick around to check out our conversation from 2017. It's the one that they're going to hear. So you hear us now and then listen to us then and go, well, those guys, they didn't know they didn't know nearly what they know now.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to hear that. I mean, and I'd love to hear when this episode goes live, which is actually happening just a couple of days after our conversation. I want to hear your feedback. I look forward to hearing seeing the email from you going, we said that? Like, that's what we thought?
Wait. Yeah, I can't wait to hear what I'm saying.
Oh, man. Yeah. Where can people keep up with what you're doing now so that they can, foster a relationship with you as well?
Sure. Well, I'm at all places. Life is Organized, lifeisorganized.com. Same at Facebook, Instagram, and or Mridu Parikh on LinkedIn, which is really one of my favorite places to hang out now.
Mridu, thanks for joining me for update here on A Productive Conversation. And now, after this break, we will resume with our Flashback Friday episode from a conversation that we had almost 8 years ago. Thanks for joining me today.
I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
So speaking of automation, we've talked about automation quite a bit on the podcast, especially recently, more so than ever before, because as my business has grown and as those who listen, those of you out there that are listening, that your business have grown, automation's becoming more essential, and it's easier to do than ever before, isn't it?
Absolutely. It is so simple. I mean, I pride myself on simplicity, and I don't know if it's because I'm lazy or because I just like things simple.
Probably a bit of both. Probably a bit of both.
Probably both. But you don't need you can use all the apps and tools and everything out there, but you really could just use like a Google spreadsheet, a Google Doc. I really say start with the Google suite and you can start documenting everything.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about just starting simply. Because I think a lot of people, I mean, if you've listened to the episode where I talked to Wade Foster of Zapier, and you've read my post about the whole idea of self-automation, a lot of people get overwhelmed by that initially. So you mentioned like starting simply with a Google, like, can you dive into that and unpack that a little bit?
Absolutely. I think that if we, again, keep it really simple in your mind and think like, I'm just going to make a checklist for everything that I'm doing from the time I start, working my business in the morning to the evening. If we start keeping these types of checklists or just processes really simply documented on, like I said, a Google Doc or Google spreadsheet, that is going to be your first step in sort of automating everything for you. So for instance, you just said something about how the intro to this, how, you just changed it up and we're still sort of learning it and maybe, just making that part of your process. Well, if that's something that, and perhaps you already have this, but let's say if we're back to that Google spreadsheet or that doc and we're writing down, okay, on the beginning of the podcast, tell the person you're interviewing there how we're going to lay out the call and what the intro is going to be like. And you sort of have this checklist of things you're just going down. That is a sort of a self-automation. And so what this does is it frees up so much mental space because you don't have to worry about what did I forget to tell them, or have to spend your time and your energy and your brain power on remembering all the details, right? Things don't fall through the cracks anymore. It's just this like self-check for you. It's this insurance policy that things are going to get done in the right order. You haven't forgotten anything. And then you can simply take that checklist or that document or that process and pass it on to someone else. If you're training somebody, if you're hiring someone on your team, if you're sharing it, with a colleague and brainstorming, you have that all there. And I also find like when things are written down, that's when you can identify gaps and opportunities. So when you have something, written, and let's say it's a blog post, right? Every week you're doing a blog post and you've been doing this forever and you sort of have all that information up in your head. But when you actually start getting that process down on paper and you're like, okay, well, first I'm going to open up my, MailChimp, and then I'm, and all the different steps, you're writing it down. all of a sudden, when you're seeing it visually, you might be able to say, oh, well, you know what? Here's a step that I could either have somebody else do, or I can simplify this, or this seems repetitive, or what, and it also opens it up that way. There's so many benefits of just kind of writing everything down in sort of this checklist format over the course of the day.
When you get into helping people with this kind of thing, I find, and even if for me as well, the process of doing this can become overwhelming at first, which is somewhat ironic because it's designed to help you stave off overwhelm in the long run. How do you walk through with the people you work with to make sure that they don't get to the point where they're like, oh, you know what, I'll just do it later, or you know what, it's really not that critical. Like, I mean, when I spoke to Michael Gerber, he's got the book now called Beyond the E-Myth. He talks about, again, that idea of working, on your business rather than working in your business, right? How do you kind of help people separate themselves so that they can put these processes in place so they've got more of a balance between a process-driven outcome and a results-oriented outcome?
Well, so I think you hit on something really important about what you just said about Michael Gerber. I think this actually is, to me, this is the working on your business. Like this, to creating the processes, to me, is like that was part of that 5%. If you hear that 5, work on that 5% of your business. To me, this is part of that. So this is what's going to help you streamline, what's going to help you delegate, what's going to help you automate, what's going to help you grow your business, free up your time. So to me, this is such a critical part. But in terms of actually, getting yourself to do it and motivating yourself and making the time, I'd say, start with one project at a time, or one, task that you are outlining. Again, if it's how you do your blogs, or how you do your podcast, or how you even have a sales conversation, just start with one. Okay, start with one thing. Don't try to do 5 of them or 10 of them at a time. We know that's just overwhelming, and that, makes you procrastinate one. So pick one. Set that time on your calendar as you would any other, task that we're going to be working on, say for, use your Pomodoro technique, or whatever tools and tips that you have to make yourself sit down for that 25 minutes or that, 45 minutes of your day to work on that process. And then, continue to schedule it during the week. I definitely think that we overestimate the time that this is going to take. I think it's something that, it may take a week or 2 weeks, but in our minds, we think it's going to take months. And so when we just actually sit down, completely focused, undistracted, and block out that time to work on just one of these processes at a time, I think you'll be amazed how quickly you can get through that.
One of your posts, you talk about the learning curve, the dreaded learning curve. And I've set up a day where I just set aside for I call it training day. And I think you've heard me talk about this, where it's, I learn and I train on that day so that my brain is wired to do that. How, especially during this process, because there is a lot of learning going on. And first off, I mean, we'll unpack this into 2 separate questions. But explain to me, break this blog post down a little bit more. But how do you? Because I think the learning curve is something that you're going to have. But how do you make it more palpable? I guess is probably or palatable is probably the better way to say it.
Sure. So you mean in terms of someone starting this process?
Or just or both. I mean, because the process is, in order to, I think starting this process is one aspect of it. But I think in general, I mean, a lot of people are trying to do a lot of things. And when they start to automate some of the things they no longer need to worry about, they're going to try to take on new things, right? They're going to try to learn how to use ConvertKit, or they're going to try to learn how to do a sales funnel or whatever. Or they're just going to try to learn how to knit. I mean, how do you, what are some of your pieces of advice on kind of mitigating that learning curve as much as possible?
Well, so there's one is, of course, research. Researching it, reading the reviews, talking to colleagues, I think is so important. I would imagine that most entrepreneurs or, people just starting their businesses are part of other groups, whether it's online or Facebook in trainings or in person. And so just sort of raising your hand or sending out that email or even that quick text that says, hey, I'm considering using, I need an email service provider. What do you guys suggest? And so I think that's a lot, because when you're speaking to people who are in similar situations or have similar experience or are where you want to be, they're going to have a perspective that's very different than, let's say, the company that's selling it, or, like they're really going to have that firsthand experience. So number one, I always say just reach out, to your peeps and see what their experiences are like. So you've really got to take this culmination of this research, best practices, experience, and then of course, just your resources at that time, based on maybe your monetary resources, your time, your effort. Sometimes you might know that one product it's just clearly going to be better, but it's just not doable at this time. Like you just don't have the resources, whether it's your time or your money. So you're going to have to go with the in between, and until you get there. But know that, that learning curve is it's a continuous process. But each time, I will say this, each time it gets easier and easier and easier, right? Because you're sort of are like building up your confidence of knowing, oh, I figured that other thing out last time. I'll figure out the next one. I'll figure out the next one. And it actually becomes less and less daunting because you build up that confidence of knowing that I will figure this out,
So you're big on systemizing. I mean, clearly that's a huge thing. And this even becomes a systemizer. I want to talk about alignment, because I think that kind of work, that kind of building systems and automations can really lead to alignment when you kind of marry it up with the goals you have. What are your thoughts on alignment? Like, when you define it, how do you look at alignment, especially when you're working with clients?
It's really being crystal clear on your goals, and then looking at those goals and being crystal clear on your next actions. And it feels like that should be so easy, right? Because it feels like, well, of course I know my goal. I want to grow my business, or, I want to make more money, or I want to impact more people. It seems like it should be so simple. But it's so difficult because we know that, those goals are, they're really big and they're higher reaching, but that leaves you with so much space and so many options of what to do. What is your actual true goal? Where do you see yourself? Where do you want to be? What are your short-term goals? What are your long-term goals? And then what are the specific, like really, really specific actions that are going to help you get there? And then how do you prioritize those actions? I know you talk a lot about that because there are always 100 different things we could be doing. So it really helped my clients, like once we can get crystal clear on what's your sort of immediate next, what's your big long-term goal? Yes. But then sort of like, okay, then what are the immediate steps we need to take to start getting there? I really like to work in sort of these 2-week sprints. I find like they really help people take action. I think it's great. Of course, you should have a big goal, have an annual goal, even have quarterly goals. It's great to have a vision. You should know where you're going. But sometimes that doesn't leave you with enough guidance for what to do in the day to day. So if you kind of set up these sort of 2-week goals or 2-week sprints, so that then you're like, okay, well, I'm trying to reach this next little step in the next 2 weeks. Now I can look at my day by day over the next 10 days, let's say, and see exactly how I can fit that in and make that happen.
So let's talk about a 2-week sprint, because I find that most people tend to work in week chunks or in month chunks, right? But you've kind of parsed it down to like the 2 weeks. So can you walk me through that process? So, because I find it that I'm not saying it's arbitrary, but it's kind of one of those things where it's not conventional, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's say a 2-week goal right now, let's say I want to make some website updates, right? There are specific website updates you want to make. So, and just to back up, you may have 2 or 3 2-week goals. Like it's not 10, but it's about, I say up to 3. So you're working on different things simultaneously. You're moving a lot of things. You're moving several things, not a lot of things, a couple or several things at the same time. So at the end of that 2 weeks, you're really accomplished. Like you really move forward. So if we're staying with that one goal about making these website updates, it might be something that you've been procrastinating for a long time, or you just haven't sort of like bit the bullet on exactly what you want to update or what you want to do. And now that you're like, okay, I've given myself that 2 weeks. Now we're going to go back and say, okay, what are the priorities that you have to update? What are the most important things to update in those next 2 weeks? So maybe the most important things are your cart, like the options in your cart. You need to add on a couple more products. And this then means you need the photography and you need the verbiage and then we'll start breaking that down. Okay, well, day 1, maybe we'll get the photo for this product. Maybe day 2, we'll write the copy. Maybe day 3, we'll work on the shopping cart. Maybe day 4, and we'll start breaking that down. So that really over the 2 weeks, you are consistently moving forward. Every day when you're having some type of accomplishment, it's just motivating you and keeping you inspired to keep moving. And maybe it'll be done before the 2 weeks. Fantastic. But sometimes I just find like the 1 week is just too short to kind of reach something. And then the 1 month again can feel like, oh, I'll get to it next week. And I just have found, and I've just kind of, it's not set in stone, but I have just found the 2 weeks works really well. It's not too short, but it's not too long that you lose sight of your goals.
Right. Now let's talk about how you move those forward with the two areas that you talk about. And we talked about this when leading up to the interview, is there's two areas that if you want to grow their business, and really, I think it's beyond business too at this point. I think there's a lot of life factor stuff in here as well. Is the improvements need to happen in communication and technology. Where are you, when you talk about communication and improving that, what do you mean by that? Do you mean, clearer communication? Do you mean, overall like how do you parse that out when you're talking to somebody? Because, that to me could mean a whole bunch of different things. So when you were saying, you need to improve your communication, and then we'll dive into the tech stuff in a bit. How do you work through that with someone?
So I actually think it's really intertwined, the communication and the technology. Yeah. And it's kind of just where we started, which is like that automating or putting out these processes and documenting. That to me is like a communication to yourself. Like number one, it holds you, making you really crystal clear on exactly what are the steps, what are the next steps, how is this going to look like, how does this unfold? It's communicating. If you have a team, even if you just have a 5-hour-a-week VA, it's helping, it's communicating exactly to them, crystal clear here, step by step, what to get done. And so that is now intertwined with this idea of this automation, right? Or these simple processes to put it in place. And then you're also being really communicating with yourself really clearly when we're talking about these goals. It's how am I communicating to myself? And again, to the greater team, what are our goals for the next 2 weeks? How are we breaking this down day by day? How am I making time for this? So it's sort of like a self-communication, but also it's team communication. But I think it's sort of just, again, that like, how are we all in alignment? How are we all, whether it's one person or 5 people or 10 people, or whatever, moving towards the same goals at the same time, that everyone is really clear of what they're responsible for, what the deadlines are, what we're going to be creating, all of that information.
Let's talk about let's talk about some of the technology tools that you use in order to promote, again, this idea of alignment and automation, because I think that there's some real power behind it. What are some of the technology tools that you use beyond, once you start to dive beyond like the simple stuff that you touched on initially, like what are some of those tools that you use and that you recommend people look at when they're trying to automate more? And I want to say more better, but that's not what I'm going to say. We try to automate more in a way that's going to serve you better.
So I use Asana, which is, again, really, really, really simple. It's like old school project management, file, subfile, subfile. So it works well for me. And that's actually where we've created with my team. I have an assistant, that's where we've created all of our processes. So I literally have a project that might say, I'll just go back to, video, blog posts. And in that, we've created, it might have 50 steps, literally. It's just step by step. So every week, we'll just duplicate that. So after I write my blog post, I can pass it along to my assistant, and she or he can just duplicate that process, and there are check boxes each one, and just check down each step. So that each of the 50 steps are completed. And that way, I can see in Asana, which is a project management tool, I can see as tasks are completed. I can see where they are. If there's any confusion or they can write it back to me. We can make that task more clear. We just stay on top of all our projects that way. So that has been a fantastic, really simple, free communication tool for us to help sort of automate that process, to help delegate that process, and for us to stay really clear on our goals and what we're trying to get done.
What led you to Asana? Because I'm a big fan of Asana as well. We use it for productivityist. There's a lot of tools out there. What was the impetus? Because there's other people will use. I love the fact you can integrate Asana with Slack, of course. There's Zapier, which we talked about a little bit earlier, allows for a lot of integrations there as well. What led you to Asana versus a whole bunch of other tools that are out there? Because there's no shortage of tools, which is, I think, where a lot of people get stuck.
Yeah, I started off with Trello. I had my web developer and an assistant both use that. So I was like, all right, sure, let's just try that one. And for me, it just, I, I love the visualness of it, but what I had a hard time with Trello was keeping track of multiple projects going on at the same time. They just getting intertwined. I just couldn't see it properly. And maybe it's just, like I said, I'm more old school that I like folders and subfolders.
Well, and now Asana has boards, so you can actually have that board view if you want. And not everybody does, but it is there.
Yeah. And then honestly, I just tried Asana after that because I'd heard a lot about it. And I think, again, for me, it's the simplicity of it, that it's just so simple. And I love that. And I love some of the features of it. You can see that, assign due dates. You can see where people are. You can check it off. It just works really well for me.
Awesome. Let's talk a bit more about like how there's a blog post you wrote about, which I found, especially after reading Stephen Pressfield's Turning Pro, and I've read it a while ago. This is from earlier in the summer last year, where you talk about what got you from amateur to pro. And I love where you talk about the kids. And this is where you and I can kind of, we're also aligned in this, in that we have kids. We work, you work from home, right? So, you mentioned that you always used your kids as an excuse for the impact and income you could make. I want to. Can you dive into that a bit deeper? I know we're going a little. I think this does have quite a bit to do with alignment, because I struggle with the same thing as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I say in that for the longest time when my kids were young, that was exactly what I said. I would use them as an excuse. Like, I only have a certain amount of hours in my day. How can you expect me to grow this? I would tell my husband, this is I don't have the time for this. So I'm doing some other things. And I say, when things changed for me, or when I went from amateur to pro, was instead of using them as an excuse, I used them as a motivation. And so instead of like, I only have 4 hours in a day, now I'm like, I only have 4 hours a day. I better make it super, super productive. I better make it super efficient. And I think that just sort of, when you have that change of mindset, that's when you're looking for these types of things. You're like, how can I automate things? Where can I delegate? How can I make it? How do I stay super focused and in alignment on what's important, right? I always say, like, focus on the right things. Like, I help people focus on the right things. There's a million things, especially when you're working from home, because it's just in your face all the time, right? The kids are screaming, the laundry, and the dish, and there's just so much more sort of just visual stuff around you. And so to keep your headspace and your mind just really focus on the right things. What are the right things that are going to move my business, are going to move the needle in my business forward right now, today? And so I think that to me was sort of the turning point, to be like, just to look at them differently, or look at my situation instead of being like, oh, woe is me. Now it's like, oh, this is like a gift almost, like, I mean, I'm sure I didn't think that way, but I was like, okay, I just got to make this work as best as I can. This is going to help push me to make me more efficient.
That wraps up this week's episode, Mridu. Thanks so much for joining me. Where can people find you on the internet if they want to learn more about what you do and how to get more aligned and automated in the process?
Absolutely. Come on over to lifeisorganized.com or lifeisorganized.com/pro. And that will get you over to all the business hacks and productivity tools.
Again, thanks for joining me today. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks to Mridu for joining me once again, just to provide an update as to what's going on. I'm looking forward to having her on the show again, where she can give even more of an update. And she's got some stuff in the works. So I'm not going to share that with you now, but I'm looking forward to having that conversation with her and bringing it to you once again when that happens. If you don't want to miss that conversation, subscribe to the podcast. That way you won't miss a single episode of what's to come. And we've got a lot coming. You get the Flashback Friday episodes. We have bonus episodes that occasionally will show up on these Fridays, but typically we do the Flashback Fridays. We have our weekly episodes that drop once a week with fresh, shiny new episodes, which includes our PM Talk series that takes place every month, where myself and my good friend Patrick Rohn talk about different subjects that are related to productiveness and managing your relationship with time. All of that just for free, for subscribing. So wherever you get your podcasts, hit the subscribe button, and that way you won't miss a single episode. Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can even put comments and stuff and engage with me through Spotify. or even YouTube. Now, if you want to support the show beyond that, you can check out the sponsors that you heard during today's episode. Just go to mikevardy.com/podcast sponsors. Check out any of those that resonate with you by clicking on the links, and that way they know that we sent you. If you want to get the show notes for this episode, you can do that right where you get your podcasts, or you can also visit mikevardy.com/podcast 582. You can find everything there. And while you're on the website, look around. There's articles and a bunch of other stuff that you can check out. If you like the podcast, I think you'll like what else I have to offer as well. That's it for this episode. Until next time, I'm Mike Vardy, the host of A Productive Conversation, reminding you to stop doing productive and start being productive. See you later.